10. Car vs. Saw blade. While driving his pickup truck to the Chinese city of Chongqing one day in 2015, a driver had a terrifying surprise. He heard a big bang coming from the other lane when suddenly he collided with a large circular saw blade that was rolling down the busy roadway. The blade had flown off another nearby vehicle that had crashed while driving in the opposite direction of the man. News reports detail how the driver saw it flying toward his truck before it pierced the hood of his car. Luckily, it came to a stop before it could reach the driver, the giant blade narrowly missing him by no more than a foot or two, leaving him lucky to be alive. Photos of the vehicle after the incident show a huge 20-inch, 50-centimeter wide gash in the hood of the truck. Nobody was hurt, and the blade was later safely removed from the vehicle it launched itself into. But this situation could have easily gone wrong. It could have been deadly. 9. Ricky Book. One day in early 2018, a 22-year-old law student named Ricky Book fainted in a New York City subway station, causing her to fall into the path of an oncoming train. She was on her way to a doctor's appointment when it happened, and the poor girl landed between the electrified third rail and the platform's wall. Book was incredibly lucky to still be alive after falling into the exact spot she needed to be in to avoid getting hit by the train. A bystander quickly snapped photos as a transit worker pulled the young woman to safety, but she couldn't remember any of the accident later on. It wasn't until Buke's family showed her the front page of the New York Post that featured one of the pictures of her rescue that she understood the severity of what had happened to her. Her parents flew from Denmark to New York City to help care for her during her recovery from the accident. Buke was left with a broken ankle and vertebrae. She had been sick in the days leading up to her fall and was on her way to get treatment for a lingering throat infection when the unexpected medical emergency happened. Luckily, Buke escaped with her life in a situation where the odds were entirely not in her favor. 8. Michaela Medina. A young woman named Michaela Medina was swimming at West Beach off the Galveston, Texas coast in 2014 when she felt something strange bump into her from behind. At first, she felt no pain at all, but suddenly, whatever it was clamped down hard on her back. Medina left the water as soon as she realized something was very wrong and asked her mother to take a look at her back, which had a huge shark bite on it. It wasn't until the girl's mum told her that she was bleeding that Medina realized the seriousness of her injury and started to cry. She wasn't very far out in the water when the shark bit her in the upper back near her shoulder blade. In fact, she was just kneeling in waist-deep water. Medina was the only member of her family that went swimming that weekend on Galveston Island, where they own a vacation home. Luckily, their friend and neighbor happened to be a doctor and was around to quickly treat the girl's puncture wounds. As scary as the situation was, Medina acknowledged how it could have been much worse. Shark attacks on humans aren't very common in the Galveston waters, but the teen was lucky the creature let go and swam away instead of continuing to latch on. Bull sharks are the most common type of shark in the area, which points towards this species as the likely culprit behind Medina's attack. 7. The Robertson family. One day in early 1971, Dougal and Lynn Robertson set sail from Cornwall, England in their yacht, called the Lucette, for what was supposed to be an exciting voyage around the world for the couple. Things were going fine until a year and a half later, when killer whales attacked the boat in the Pacific, about 200 miles, 322 kilometers from the coast of the Galapagos Islands. The yacht sank within a few minutes, forcing the group onto a life raft. By then, one of their children had stayed behind in the Bahamas and had picked up another hitchhiker. 17 days later, the raft deflated. The 6 individuals crammed onto a tiny 9-foot, 2.7-meter dinghy. They were very low on food and water, and nobody even knew they were missing. Since they weren't on a main shipping route, the chance they would be found and rescued was very low. For 38 days, they survived in the middle of nowhere as sharks circled their boat. After running out of water, they drank shark and fish blood in order to stay hydrated. They also drank rainwater through enemas, which sounds disgusting, but in their case, it turned out to be life-saving. Finally, a passing Japanese fishing boat spotted the dinghy from afar, roughly 300 miles, 483 kilometers from land. At first, the crew just assumed there wouldn't be anyone on board, but to their surprise, the dinghy contained all 6 crew members, and they were all still very much alive. While the family's dream of sailing around the world came to an unexpected and disappointing end, they were extraordinarily lucky to have gotten out with their lives. 6. John Deere. An Australian sailor named John Deere was trying to sail around the world in 2019 when he lost his footing. The man fell off his boat and into heavily shark-infested waters off Panama's San Blas Islands. It happened just as night fell and Deere wasn't wearing any safety equipment. To make things worse, his boat was on autopilot, leaving him stranded helpless as it sailed away without him. At first, Deere was convinced he was going to die and that no other fate was even remotely possible. But these thoughts were fleeting, and he soon switched into survival mode, ready to stay alive at any cost. Determined to reach safety, Deere swam in the direction of the shore. The nearest land was more than 10.5 miles, 17 kilometers away, and he wasn't that used to swimming long distances, but he knew that if he didn't at least try, he would either drown or get eaten by hungry sharks. Along the way, he felt something bite his foot and went into panic mode thinking it was a shark. But he realized he was just being bitten by fish and kept going, even when he started to lose hope. Miraculously, Deere made it close to shore, switching between 2 different strokes and using the moon to help him navigate. A boat found him along some shallow rocks the next day and picked him up. Deere was so grateful to survive, but also sad he didn't get to finish his trip as planned. He also lost his boat, which had everything he owned inside. He sold nearly all his belongings before the voyage, and his boat was eventually found destroyed in the water. His friends have since set up a crowdfunding page to help him get back on his feet. Strangely enough, the man said he hasn't completely ruled out sailing again, but for now he's focused on restarting his life. 5. Bowie Jarley. 54-year-old Bowie Jarley was working on his house next to a river in Malaysia one morning earlier this year when a crocodile suddenly attacked him out of nowhere. He later described the reptile as a baby, but big enough to hurt him. The man's 25-year-old daughter, Zyrene Bowie, heard her mother screaming and came rushing over to see what was wrong. She watched helplessly as her father wrestled with the creature, later describing how Bowie slapped the croc on the head in a desperate attempt to end the struggle. It was enough for him to get free from the menacing creature's jaws, and he somehow walked away with only minor lacerations to his torso. Bowie later told the press he was completely unaware the crocodile had been watching him in the moments leading up to the attack as he was making repairs to his home. He went to a medical clinic after the incident, simply as a precaution, to make sure his injuries weren't any worse than they seemed. 4. Vesna Velovic. A Serbian national named Vesna Velovic was working as a flight attendant in 1972 when a briefcase bomb exploded in the baggage compartment of the plane while she was working. The aircraft was heading to Croatia after leaving Denmark when the explosion tore through the plane, causing it to break apart over Czechoslovakia. Out of the 28 crew members and passengers aboard, Velovic was the only survivor after the plane fell 33,000 feet, 10,058 meters out of the sky. A villager named Bruno Honke heard her screaming and found her in the wreckage. Thanks to his experience as a World War II medic, he was able to keep Velovic alive until emergency responders got to the scene. Investigators believe the woman survived thanks to a food cart that trapped her in the fuselage. Everyone else had fallen out of the plane into their death, but as the chamber depressurized, the cart kept Velovic in place. The investigation also found that the fuselage's impact was cushioned by the heavily wooded and snow-covered mountainside, making for a softer landing. Velovic didn't remember anything about the accident. Thankfully, she made a nearly complete recovery, but walked with a limp for the rest of her life. Her survival, strangely enough, earned her the distinction of being the Guinness World Record holder for surviving the highest fall without a parachute. She passed away a few years ago in 2016 at the age of 66. 3. Breast is best. During the early 2000s, the Dominican Republic experienced a period of economic turmoil, causing many of its citizens to flee to Puerto Rico. Many never made it to their destination and were lost at sea in the roughly 100-mile, 161-kilometer stretch of water that separates the islands, known as the Mona Passage. One group of 16 people almost added to those statistics when they became stranded in a small handmade boat and found themselves inching closer to death. They realized shortly after setting sail that their compass wasn't working, leaving them helplessly lost in their small 24-foot 7.3-meter vessel. Some group members' throats were reportedly so dry that all they could do was spit blood, while others on board could barely speak. It wasn't until one woman Faustina Mercedes shared something she normally only gave to her 1-year-old daughter, her breast milk. Yep, you heard it correctly. It probably wasn't the most comfortable idea for the 31-year-old or anyone else aboard the raft, but it was better than the guaranteed death they would all have suffered otherwise. For just a few seconds each day, each of the 8 men and 7 women she was sailing with helped themselves to a little breast milk. Faustina's sister would take some and then pass it to her mouth to mouth. And it was just enough to keep everyone in the group alive as their boat drifted for 12 days before reaching land. The currents had pushed the raft back to shore, making the individuals who'd wanted so desperately to leave their country happy to return to it. If not for Faustina's breast milk, they would have probably all died, earning the young woman the nickname Little Angel of the Sea. 2. Maria Hernandez. During the 1980s, a terrifying serial killer known as the Night Stalker murdered at least 13 victims in a little over a year. Only one of his targets, Maria Hernandez, lived to tell her tale. She was 22 years old when the killer, whose real name was Richard Ramirez, attacked her outside her home in Rosemead, California on March 17, 1985. Hernandez had pulled into the driveway of her condo after work and was heading toward the door when the Night Stalker slammed his hands on her car. The sudden noise startled her and made her turn around to see he was holding a gun and that it was pointed straight at her. He pulled the trigger as Hernandez threw her hands in the air, and in a once-in-a-lifetime stroke of luck, the bullet ricocheted off the key she was holding. Hernandez was still knocked on the ground by the shot's impact though. She played dead until she thought the killer had left her home after he shot her roommate to death. Maria came in through a different door only to realize the Night Stalker was still there, but she begged him not to shoot as he pointed his gun at her again, implying the first bullet had done enough damage. By some miracle, he listened and left the scene. She survived to testify in court when he was finally caught and put on trial for his gruesome crimes. Hernandez's testimony was helpful in securing Ramirez's convictions and the death penalty, ensuring the Night Stalker was permanently taken off the streets and would never harm another soul again. 1. Michael Malloy. After moving from Donegal Island to New York City during the early 20th century in hopes of finding success and opportunity, Michael Malloy became a homeless alcoholic instead. Figuring nobody would miss him, a group of men took out an insurance policy on Michael's life. Then they invited him to drink on an unlimited tab at a bar one of the co-conspirators owned. But they underestimated Malloy's ability to hold his liquor. When his condition failed to get worse like they expected, they added more dangerous ingredients to his drinks, like antifreeze and turpentine. Still, Malloy didn't die. The group even tried feeding him poisoned raw oysters and other spoiled food, but nothing seemed to work. They also left him outside in the freezing cold one night after he passed out drunk, but once again, he survived through it all. When running over Malloy with a car didn't get the job done, the group pumped gas into his body for an hour. Finally, he succumbed to their cruelty and greed. But before the men could benefit from Malloy's death, investigators caught on to their plan. They exhumed Malloy's body and put the group on trial, and the men were all convicted of murder. You can't always cheat death or justice. Thanks for watching. Have you ever had a near-death experience? Let us know in the comments below and be sure to subscribe if you want to catch our next video. See you soon. Bye.